Three things in life are certain: death, taxes, and the Apothecary Diaries being a top contender anime in any season it happens to air in. Returning for a second season, this historical drama mystery series set in Imperial China embarks yet again on another journey down the winding road of storytelling. And now there isn't much to say about the plot, not because there isn't a lot happening, there is, but because I want to avoid spoilers as much as I can, and recapping the first season as much as possible just wouldn't be very fun. And in order for you to understand the plot of the second season, you would have had to watch the first season, or at least understand what's going on. I think you get the point. I do not need to go over all this information because everything that I will say about this doesn't really require you to know what the story is entirely about. But I can say this much. Following the events of Season 1, Mao Mao finds herself being drawn ever deeper into the politics and conspiracies of high society, much to her consistent dismay. And in this case, it only gets worse now that she's basically had a target thrown on her back. But I guess that's what you get when you work for Jinshi and constantly try to thwart the plans of the enemy. Now, as compared to Season 1, Season 2 actually does have some hang-ups closer to the start of its run. Some of its storytelling isn't actually as interesting as what the previous seasons had done. The foreign diplomat stuff didn't really strike me as interesting, but it still was relevant in the end. But this was a sort of transitional point where it was attempting to move between the large-scale storytelling at the end of the first season and to the more episodic sorts of things that tend to build up the growing plot of each season. And in that sense, Season 2 is a near-perfect recreation of the success of Season 1. Even if I may not have enjoyed the stuff surrounding the foreign diplomats as much, it still ultimately does play a bit of a part in the events of this season and leaves the door open to much more in the upcoming Season 3. But once the story returns to smaller and more episodic adventures that sprinkle in those hints of grander plots, it gets right back to being the same kind of excellence that Season 1 was. And this is really the point of highest praise that I have for this series. Its masterful way of writing things that allows even the most one-off feeling episodes, say where Mao Mao accompanies two of her servant girlfriends to a ghost story event, to be tied into the main plot in some way or another. It may not have the same sort of high-stakes action or deep, compelling character drama as many other shows, but the level of its writing is largely unparalleled in the way it is able to subtly build up to one grand happening to round out the season using seemingly random events within the daily lives of its characters. The best way to describe it is that the Apothecary Diaries is one of the most efficiently and competently written series you can find. There legitimately is no filler. Every move has meaning, and there is an intention behind it that builds what the story is culminating in. That is its greatest strength. And yet again, Season 2 does this spectacularly. To be very vague about the plot details to give you an idea of what I mean, there are a lot of events that build up to this season's final confrontation. One you would expect to be a rather hostile and tense final meeting between two enemy factions, but as you approach what is the inevitable end, you start to see things more clearly. You start to see the tragic reality of the whole situation and how all of this could have likely been averted if it were not for a singular person's ego and delusion. It kept me on my toes to the bitter end, never fully revealing what would happen until it was time for it all to come to an end. It's one of the most satisfying experiences on the anime scene right now because of this exact thing. Of course, this narrative is supported by good inter-character dynamics like the relationship between Jinshi and Mao Mao, where Jinshi continues to try to tell her the truth on multiple occasions, but she'd rather just be ignorant of it because she's already touched his moderately impressive frog and realized that getting any further involved with this dude was a real bad idea if she wanted a peaceful life. Besides, she'd rather just make drugs to experiment on herself with. Gee, Mao Mao has one person in her life who genuinely cares about her well-being, and she wants to avoid the dude like the plague. I feel bad for him. There's also Mao Mao's friendship with Xiaolan, and the new girl in this season, she's sweet. where the usually standoffish Mao Mao shows some more human elements of herself and actually gets close to these two. And don't forget the consistent tension between Jinchi and Lady Gyokyo over whose servant Mao Mao actually is, because she's kind of changed hands a couple of times due to a lot of misunderstandings and the way things work in the rear palace. Even more minor characters like the strategist Lakan, who also happens to be Mao Mao's father, have interesting personalities that make for great parts of the story overall. But in all these dynamics, we can see that the characters are written in a way that makes them likable, while also still having some level of flaw or defect to their personality that keeps them from being the Mary Sue type. Mao Mao's really good at what she does, but there are a lot of things that she still struggles with. Everyone has got their own tensions and their own hang-ups to deal with, but none of them feel so exaggerated that they become an obstacle for the story, nor do they feel like they're simply there just for the hell of it. It all seems to arise out of entirely natural circumstances within the story. Again, competence and efficiency. It's the best way to describe the Apothecary Diaries. It may run long, but none of it is wasted time. It all means something. And all of this is also backed up by an overall outstanding production value that makes the series not just narratively appealing, but also visually appealing. Since there isn't a vast amount of action to the story, animators are free to focus on refining the common visual appeal of every scene to make the most out of each one. If you were to say this wasn't a good-looking anime, I'd have to disagree with you. Unfortunately, this does mean that when it comes time for the one or two scattered action scenes in the show, they aren't really all that good. But that's hardly a huge complaint to levy at a series that is mostly enjoyed for its writing. In all things, The Apothecary Diaries is a massive success if you ask me, and with Season 3 on the horizon, you can look forward to more. So farewell to this slice of greatness, and may we meet again in the near future.